Did you know that there was a secret that Jesus knew to identify when times had shifted so that he was able to walk now into the fullness of the destiny that God had for him? And I'm not talking about the secret that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. That is absolutely true, but I'm talking about something else. There was a certain point in Jesus's life when things shifted for him, and they shifted him out of his service into his destiny and into the fullness of his ministry. I'm going to talk about that secret today on this weekly word of prophetic encouragement, so be sure to stay with me and watch. My name is Arleen Westerhof, and welcome to this weekly word of prophetic encouragement. Now, these weekly words are designed to help you to navigate the times in which we are living. And you know what? It's so incredibly important. I was on a telephone call, actually broadcast 5 in a row yesterday, together with different members of our European Prophetic Council. And one of the things that I can say to you is that there is an acceleration that is happening in the spirit right now, an acceleration in the spirit realm. Things have shifted, and now new things are opening up, but we need to know this secret. Before I start, however, I'm just going to say, if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube page, just push on the subscribe button. And for some of you, that subscribe button may appear at the end of this video. And when you subscribe, don't forget to push on the bell icon so that you can be notified every time I bring a new weekly word of prophetic encouragement. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about the secret that Jesus discovered. Now, recently, I spoke about finding your voice. And our voice is indeed the word that God has given us to proclaim prophetically. And I said in that broadcast, you speak it out of your family, you speak it out of your life, you speak out the words of your church, of your workplace, of your nation. And so we've dealt with that. But finding your voice, and the secret that Jesus discovered also was that finding your voice is also finding your significance. When we truly find our voice, that's when our voice starts to connect with the needs that we see around us, and that propels us into significance, together with the call of God on our lives. And so I'm going to start with Luke chapter 4, because there was a day when Jesus found his voice. Now, Jesus, he had already been baptized by John the Baptist. He had spent time in the wilderness. And then he came back to the village of Nazareth. Luke 4, verse 16 says, and as usual, he went to the synagogue. That was Jesus' habit. And he stood up to read the scriptures. And the scroll of Isaiah the prophet was handed to him, and he unrolled the scroll, and he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, and the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." Now, that was the day that Jesus found his voice. The scriptures don't tell us, when exactly he knew that he had come to the earth to die, but we do know that even as a 12-year-old boy, he was very, very aware that he needed to be about his Father's business. That's what he said to Joseph and Mary when they spent days, looking for him in Jerusalem. So even as a young boy, we know that he had an awareness that he was the Son of God. But we don't know when exactly the Father, through the Holy Spirit, revealed to Jesus that he was to suffer and to die on a cross. But this day, this morning, in the synagogue, Jesus stood up and he found his voice, and he proclaimed with the voice that he found, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," he said, "for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. he has sent me, said Jesus about himself, to proclaim that captives will be released, the oppressed will be set free, and the time of the Lord's favor had come. And at the moment that he proclaimed that, it was a separation between what was and what was to come. Why? Because the people in the synagogue knew that something had happened. Something that was out of the ordinary, something that they didn't recognize, because many of them hadn't recognized him yet for who he really was, the Son of the living God. And what happened? They became offended. But Jesus had found his voice, and he went on to step into 3 years of ministry that literally changed the course of the world as we know it. So what is the secret that I'm talking about to propel you into your destiny? Well, it has to do with finding your voice that will lead to finding your significance, what you were sent here to do. Now, as I've said, it's just times are changing, things are accelerating rapidly. And one of the things that each one of us needs to do in this season right now is to look and to say, Lord, who have you called me to track with? And you can do that pretty easily by just prayerfully coming apart with God and saying, Lord, who in the last 2 or 3 years have you put beside me that I am to track with? And why is that so important? Because the seasons have shifted, times have changed, and so it's not necessarily true that those you tracked with 5 years ago or 10 years ago are going to be the same ones that you're called to track with now in this new season that God has for us. And it's so incredibly important that you find your voice of significance. And when I say that, I mean you find the prophetic voice, but the passion that God has put in you will ignite that voice, and then you look around and you see the needs around you. And the question that each one of us needs to answer this time is, what is the need that I am called to meet with the voice that God has given me? And when we find that and start to proclaim it, that's when our calling is activated for this new season. Now, we are in a season where God has more for you. And some of you, you've been tracking faithfully with the Lord, and you're walking in part of your calling, but not the whole of your calling. This particular week, this past week, I read a story about Winston Churchill, and it was Churchill's speech that he gave, as Great Britain was entering the war. Adolf Hitler and the German army, they had already taken different nations. They had invaded some of the nations of what is now Eastern Europe, and they had taken them successfully. And now they set them sights on the rest of Europe. And England knew that it had to act. But Winston Churchill, stood there the day he made that speech, and he knew that he was dealing with a nation that was in great fear. He had to calm the fear of the people in the nation. And so as a result, what did he do? He found his voice. Before I tell you about the speech, it's really important to note Winston Churchill, he was a journalist, he was a minister of defense in one of the British cabinets, and he was the one who supervised the invasion of Gallipoli, a very historic battle, but the British lost it badly. And that was reckoned to Winston Churchill. In other words, people said that was Churchill's fault. And so he was an okay journalist, but not brilliant. He was an okay cabinet member, but he was considered a failure because of that. And for a large part of Winston Churchill's life, even until he retired, most people looked at him and thought that he was a failure in what he had done. He had not done anything really spectacular at that moment. However, Winston Churchill began to find his voice as Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party arose in Germany. And he kept warning the British people that there was danger coming to the British Isles and that Hitler would not stop. And nobody listened to him until the day it became evident that Hitler would not stop. And then everybody turned to Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, as the Prime Minister of Great Britain, stood up one day and he had to speak to the British people, and he said, "We will fight." He said, "We will fight in the fields. We will fight in France. We will fight in the villages. We will fight in the streets. We will fight on the plains of battle." And he said, "And we will not give up." And he said, "If by some unforeseeable chance," and he said, "and I do not think that for a moment, we are defeated, then our forces positioned in the other nations of the Commonwealth will continue to fight until we push back this great darkness." Winston Churchill mobilized with his voice, with his speech that day, an entire nation and commonwealth to go to war against the evil that Nazi Germany represented in his day and in his time. Now, I found it really, really significant that as Churchill talked about, we will fight and we will not give up. You know, it says he spent no time addressing the fear that the people had, but instead he put a vision before the people, and the entire nation and nations followed Churchill into battle. And even though it was tough, and even though there were many, many discouragements along the way, eventually victory came years later. That was the day that Winston Churchill found his voice. God is calling each one of us now to find our voice. And you know, as I do, if you are one who's been waiting a long time, you know, for your calling to really manifest in the fullness, can you just say, "I'm one of those you're talking about"? Just type that into the comments. All right? Because thing is, I want to pray for you in a moment. We are in a day and an age right now where the season has shifted. With Jesus, when he stood up in the temple and said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to, set the captives free, to preach the good news, to proclaim, the day of the Lord's favor." The season had shifted. Jesus was able to discern it, and that day, with his voice, new reality opened up for him, his destiny. He was able to walk into the fullness. With Winston Churchill, Churchill, the day he stood up there and he said, "We will fight," Churchill found his voice, but he also articulated the spirit of a nation. And so as a result, the entire nation went to war and they prevailed. It took time, but they prevailed. What is your voice? If you already have some insights, then just type that into the comment. My voice is meant to say this, or my voice is meant to do this, or my voice is meant to address a need. Just take a moment and just think about for yourself, what is your voice called to set free and to release in this time? And as you do, I'm just going to say right now, in the name of Jesus, for each one of you watching, Lord, give clarity about the voice that you're calling us to have, the voice that you are calling us to use, the voice of significance at this time. And I speak it out, a setting free of the voice over your life,